The state Senate reached an agreement last night over part of Governor Baker's plan for MBTA reform. After negotiations, Senate leaders adopted his proposal to have the T overseen by a temporary financial and management control board. The original plan was changed to reduce conflict with the current board for the State Department of Transportation. The agreement follows support for the special board in the reform measure from the House of Representatives. This afternoon, the governor said the special board will place reform in a stronger focus.
The board itself, which is what the Senate passed yesterday, is just an important part of creating the kind of focus that's required here going forward.
Before last night's agreement, there was more resistance to the governor's reform package from the state Senate, but our guest was among the senators who supported the Fiscal and Management Control Board. We'd like to welcome the senator from the 2nd Suffolk and Middlesex District, Will Brownsberger. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, take me back a few weeks ago when it seemed that the Senate was going to be digging in against this board. You were saying maybe we should go through with it.
Well, yeah, I had looked at it, and I've been very concerned about the T because, of course, it's something key to my district. I represent a lot of the Green Line, and so it's lifeblood for my district. So I spent a lot of time on it, and I view the need for reform as clear, and I thought the governor's proposal was one that would put a focus on the T and allow people to ask the right questions and keep asking the right questions and do it in a very visible way. So I liked the concept of a dedicated board over the T, and I did come out early on that. I think a lot of my colleagues hadn't made up their minds yet, but kind of gelled around that in the end.
One of the other early supporters, maybe even earlier than you, was Jim Sturgis at the Pioneer Institute, and he recently had a post saying that if there's anything that shows why you need this kind of extra board is if you look at the T, it didn't even have an up-to-date backlog on its repair needs.
Well, that there's truth in that. I've found when I've tried to get a handle on, when are we going to get new Green Line cars, or when does it make sense to get new Green Line cars, those answers just slid around way too much. And I ultimately formed the opinion that we weren't going to get Green Line cars for a long time, but they were nonetheless at various different places in the capital documents. And so I think there is a need for people asking the right questions, forcing that clarity on what are you really going to do? When are you going to spend the money? What are you going to spend it on? What are your goals? That kind of question. And a lot of other questions.
Is this really about managers and people who count the beans, or is it about the leadership? Because if the red line cars are ancient, is that really about poor bean counting, or is that about political leadership, really?
Well, I think it's about all of the above. I mean, it's not just about poor bean counting. And to the T's credit, it's important to recognize that they set priorities and got a couple of big projects out the door in the waning days of the Patrick administration. We got contracts out there to get the red line and the green line. So it's not like red line and green line cars, which are the highest priority replacement targets. So it's not like nothing's happening. That's not fair. I think there's a lot of people trying to do the right thing there, and there are funding issues, there are day-to-day management issues. But what I think the board does is one particular thing, which is to shine a light, shine a focus on the planning process, on the metrics, on the money. And I think that would be very valuable for the MBTA, because people have a lot of questions. They don't know where things are headed. They don't know where things have been for sure. And having those questions answered, I think, is the foundation, or part of the foundation, for the progress we need to make.
What about some of the other issues around reform that we could still see some conflicts over, whether it's fares, union contracts, privatization?
Well, on the fares, I don't think there's going to be any conflict over the fares, in the sense that I think the legislature is pretty firm that we put in place a concept a few years ago, I guess 2013, which was that fares can go up by 5% in total every 2 years. I'm not sure that's the right concept. I think it's possible that there are plenty of affluent people who ride the T who conceivably could pay more and would pay more for more reliable service. At the same time, we need to protect people of limited income who absolutely depend on the T and have no other options. So there's a spectrum of users of the T. There may be different solutions for people in different categories. So I think there's an open question there. But what's been really clear is the legislature is not going to budge, is not going to give the governor a ticket to just go do whatever he wants on the fare increase. That's something we feel they need to come back to us on, and I think we made clear that in this legislation. I don't think there's any chance we're going to adopt a repeal of that 5% every 2 years rule. That's something that we need a separate presentation on when the time comes.
So I'm taking from this, you're trying to say that maybe we shouldn't be afraid that somebody with an iron hand on that fiscal control board is going to jack the fares way up.
No, that's not an option we opened up, and it's not an option we're going to open up. The legislature does see a need to remain responsible for that one element. But the other things, I think there's still a continuing conversation on the Pacheco issue, the privatization issue, and the collective bargaining issue.
Well, under the Pacheco law, you have to make some kind of documentation that going private doesn't cost the state more money. The T has done it sometimes already, so what do we need that we haven't had so far?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to say for many viewers to know, nobody is talking about privatizing the T. That's not something that's on the table. The governor has disavowed any intention to do that. I think he's much too smart to do that. The T is a natural monopoly. Giving away a natural monopoly to some private entity is, in the long run, no reason to believe there's going to be an upside to that. But to answer your question,
But like repair projects.
yeah, well, maybe repair. I think, by the way, I visited the MBTA repair yards. I mean, they have guys there who know how to repair things that were made 30 years ago that nobody else in the world knows how to repair. I mean, there are unique things that are in our cars that are so old that our repair yards, people say they're expensive. Well, they're expensive for a reason, because we're driving junkers. If you keep your car for 13 years, as I have, you have to bring it into the shop more often than if it's a brand new car. And that's exactly what we have on the T. We've got a lot of old equipment. It needs to come into the shop all too often. And we've got people in those yards that need to know how to repair that. But coming to your question, what is the area where you need that potential? I think you need it potentially, in the long run, to do a better job serving what I'm going to call peripheral and late night routes. Mass transit, the subways, the busy bus lines, you can't beat them for efficiency where there is the adequate density. On one side of Belmont, just to take Belmont as an example, but just as there's the lots are small, the top 2 and 3 deckers. That's where I live. I can walk out of my house. There's a bus at the corner. Every few minutes, it's almost always fills up. That's very, very efficient. The other side of Belmont is single-family homes on larger lots. There's just not that many people near the bus line. And those buses run less frequently, and they often run close to empty. And so that's not an efficient route. And I think the exciting frontier in transportation is in new technology. People are figuring out how to ride share, vehicle share, and do a better job matching people who need to go someplace to equipment that's rolling in that direction. And so you have Bridge and Uber and Lyft and all these other services that are popping up. And the T needs to be able to partner with those services to meet the needs of the less traveled routes. So I think that's the edge. I think that's, in a way, that's the future. The core services should get better. I don't think it cuts jobs in the T. I think we need to take some of those buses that are rattling around empty in the suburbs and put them on the number 1 line and the number 66 line that are very, very heavily used, and people stand on the curb because there's so much traffic on those lines. So it's about focusing the T on its core services, on its core high traffic routes, and then starting to partner more readily with private sector new models that are going to serve the places where the T is not really very well suited to serve. I mean, running a 40-foot bus to pick up a few people at 2 in the morning, that's just silly. It's just not the way to go. And the Pacheco law is a law that had a good reason for it, and it still has a good reason for it, the anti-privatization law in many parts of state government. But here I think we need to open it up, make it more flexible, get rid of the litigation risk, and just give managers the ability to try some new things.
Another idea that's in the mix here is about replacing binding arbitration for contracts with T employees. We've already done that on the Prop 2.5 with police and firefighters in cities and towns. What would be the advantage? How much of a difference would that make?
Well, that's an interesting question. How much of a difference would it make? But it's worth observing that the MBTA contracts have gone up in a healthy way year after year after year after year. Now, I'm not saying they're overpaid, but this is the bargaining dynamics that exist for the MBTA unions has allowed them to achieve a series of wage increases through the decade that I think probably do go beyond those of other public sector workers. I think there are a lot of towns in this state where police and fire took 0s and 1s and 2s in their collective bargaining contracts as the recession happened. That really didn't happen to the same degree for the MBTA contracts. They kept getting their, their 2s and 3s and benefits, through the recession, just sort of step by step by step. It just kept moving. So it could be that there would be a change in the balance a little bit that might affect wage growth and the ability to manage other things. The important thing to say about that is it's not clear we can do it because of there's federal labor law that pertains only to public transit and limits our ability to change the rules. So I'm not sure where that goes.
One other thing you're working on, not totally unrelated to the T, is the Olympics, especially the financial risks that might be on cities and towns and the Commonwealth. Anything coming out of the Senate to talk about?
Well, yes. In the Senate budget, we adopted an amendment that says the state, no agency of the state will incur any, spend any money, incur any liabilities whatsoever towards the purpose of the Olympics without a hearing and an act of the legislature. So we're not going to slip into that by accident. That's what we did. The city needs to do something like that as well to protect itself. That is the big issue for me, and I think for many people who are watching the process. The Olympics could be great, but they're high risk. It's just a risk that we in the public sector cannot afford to take. They need to find private sector people who are willing to accept that risk.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
State Senator Will Brownsberger. In a moment, we'll talk about changes in store for Boston's waterfront, but first, this message.